It's still me, and this is joint work with Cesar, Jesse, and Elliot. And this is going to be like a 10-minute talk with 5 minutes of questions in the end. And it's preliminary work, so we're not quite sure yet where we're going with all of this. But it's basically, we want to have large language models to sort of make sustainability promoting continuations and have slight nudges here and there. Now, the premise of all of this is that large language models are taking the world by storm and people are interacting with them. I talked to my cousins who are in primary school last summer and asked them whether they use ChatGPT, and they do. So it just seems like people are using it a lot. And here we have some numbers, like perhaps 5% of the population on Earth is a subscribed user to ChatGPT or Google Gemini. So in a way, if you could have those models generate continuations which are promoting sustainability, and just 1% of the users in consequence act a bit more responsible, this would have a huge impact. And therefore we are, and like then you have like all those individual actions which would add up, and perhaps next year or in 2 years we have even more users. So this could have an impact on climate change mitigation, and we are exploring whether we can have open source models do such continuations. There are a bunch of research questions which are important. The first one is we are explicitly doing nudging here. Like we try to make large language models produce language which should have behavioral implications. And then the first question is, how ethical is that? How should you disclose that? Should it be opt-in, opt-out? And you can do nudging in that direction, but you could also do nudging in different directions. Our second research question is, how effectively can we align models to do that? And then the last one is not necessarily our question, but if you'd have such models and they make recommendations which are sustainable, does that actually influence user behavior? Because perhaps users just read that and then ignore it. What we are doing is we are trying to create an alignment data set. So we have like a data set where you have normal prompts and sustainable prompts, and then we align an open source language model on that. And we also evaluate the resulting model and compare it to a based model. There are a few challenges. So, like, we do know that we can align language models to be like helpful while also not being harmful, but we don't quite know yet whether we can also align them towards being sustainable. Also, evaluation of large language models is an open research question, so we're not quite sure yet how we are going to evaluate ours. And then also not all circumstances are suitable to sustainability promoting interaction. So for example, if I ask a model to write me a hello world script in Python, and then it starts with, well, to make the world a better place, you perhaps shouldn't be too much on your computer because that consumes energy, but if you really want to, here's like, you know, the print hello world stuff. So that's perhaps not a great prompt, but if you'd ask for a recipe, then there are chances that you could do something there. And this is something we haven't realized at first, but we started to realize when we looked through what we're generating. Yeah, like there's again the ethics question and also the effectiveness question. What we did so far is we sampled prompts from an existing feedback data set. So you have prompts or questions in there. We used the ultra feedback data set and clustered all prompts with a topic model. And then we manually went through all the clusters and try to determine whether it makes sense to create sustainability continuations there. And here are a few topics where we thought this does make sense, for example, recipes or, you know, investment because sustainable investment. And then we generated continuations with GPT-4. So we basically gave GPT-4 our prompt from those topics, asked it to generate a normal continuation, and then also asked it to generate a nudged, like, continuation. Here is one example, that is the vanilla generation. So the question is, describe a memorable holiday, and then GPT-4 says, like it starts with, I'm an AI assistant, so I cannot describe that, but we just deleted that. And then it says it embarked on a memorable trip to Kyoto, and then like everything was amazing, the flights were booked well in advance, accompanied by close friends, we arrived in Japan with a sense of anticipation and excitement, and then it's a bit more blah, blah. But it's all very nice. Here's our sustainability promoting continuation, and I absolutely love it. So we still talk about Sakura, and then GPT-4 says, I embarked on a journey to the city of Kyoto. We arrived in Japan with a sense of anticipation, and then we quickly took care of offsetting our flight carbon emissions. And imagine you interact with a language model which does that all the time. Perhaps you at some point just think that this is the default and this is what you should do. And we sort of hope that this would result in like individual actions which help mitigate climate change. And Cesar takes over from here.
And I'll add just one example, which is very actionable. We're all like going to conferences, and if you ask GPT-4, for example, help me plan a trip from Lausanne to Paris, it will tell you the different modes of going there. In my case, I was asking from Zurich to Paris. It tells you can take a 1-hour flight, you can take a 4-hour train, or you can drive for 6 or 7 hours. It will already tell you some of the trade-offs. It will tell you like the train route is very scenic. It tells you that the airport is annoying because you have to go to security, so it ends up taking a lot of time. But it doesn't tell people by default that taking the train emits 50 times less CO2 than taking a flight or driving, assuming like 2 passengers per car, that ends up about equal as flying per passenger. But the models, they do know that. So if they already know, why not like give people that information so they can make a more informed decision about the trip that they're planning. So what we did was precisely that, like to create a small initial data set where we inject more information about sustainability and environment, pro-environment, so that people can make more informed decisions. And as Dominik mentioned, this can range from recipes to investments to planning a trip. And our initial data set, we applied DPO, direct preference optimization, on top of the Zephyr SFT model, which is a supervised fine-tuning from the Mistral 7B open source model. This can be done pretty quickly, especially if we add QLoRa on top of it. This saves a lot of memory. We can run it on a single consumer GPU, like an RTX 4090, and this takes less than 10 minutes to run it on 800 examples, which was our train data set. We saved 200 as a dev data set to run some evals on top. So this is just the beginning of this work. We do plan to run more experiments with more models, a larger, more comprehensive data set, and to make all of this available. The initial ones are already on Hugging Face, but we want to make this better, and hopefully integrate it as part of default into standard models and benchmarks. So one good thing that we notice is that we can make the models more sustainable, more sustainability encouraging, without compromising performance on other benchmarks. So in the case of the taking a train versus a flight from Zurich to Paris, it can give all that information, and in addition to that, also tell people about the 50x gap in CO2, for example, between a train and a car or a plane. So what we saw as a summary of the results is that the models can be equally helpful and informative, which are other dimensions we care about. And usually we also talk about models being harmless, but we don't specify like how harmless in what time horizon. If we think about the planet or future generations, we ideally would also want models to perhaps be encouraging those better. So to summarize, what we did so far was to create a small data set for sustainability promotion, we aligned using DPO and open source model. And we ran initial evals to make sure that the model is doing just as well on other dimensions, but doing a better job in being more sustainability promoting. As for future steps, we want to make this larger, more comprehensive, and hopefully integrated as part of a benchmark so that they can be baked in families of open source models and do this by default. We also want to work closely with people from ethics and social science, because I'm not qualified to know whether it is a right idea in the first place to do this and what are the best ways to do it. It sounds like a good idea, but I don't know the answer, so we want to do that for a more principled approach. And would also like to thank our sponsor, the City of Zurich, who gave us some credits to spend on OpenAI, Gemini, whatever cloud provider we want to, and as well as the Climathon Zurich organizers, which was where this idea first appeared and how this project got started. Yes, that's it. Thank you.
We've got time for one question, maybe two. Also, Cesar didn't introduce himself. You work for Google, is that correct?
Yes, Cesar work at now DeepMind in Zurich, yes.
Any questions?
Hi, thanks. That was really interesting. I don't know whether this is reserved for future work, but you talked about nudging and its ethical implications. Did you look at the existence of nudging either in the sustainable direction or against it in the non-fine-tuned models?
Like, let's say we sort of know that GPT-4 can add sustainable nudges if it wants to, because our data set is fully automatically generated with GPT-4. But it just wouldn't do so, as far as we can tell, by default. So you sort of have to add all of this to the prompt to extract that behavior from it. But so yeah, to perhaps answer your question, the model can do it clearly, but it wouldn't be its default option.
Yeah, just to complement on that, the large models, they do a good job if you provide a prompt. But the smaller ones, they don't understand the nuance that well, so you're better off like doing a full like SFT or DPO alignment.
Last burning short question.
Okay, just briefly, have you given some thought to where you're going to go beyond the technology angle, like how you're going to convince people to use these models rather than the vanilla version?
Yeah, good question. So we did talk with the Hugging Face folks, and they were supportive because they have their like NLP for social good and other similar efforts. So they were interested in supporting us in making this part of standard benchmarks. So that's the main avenue we're hoping for. Assuming this data set is large and good enough, we can incorporate it. And if it's part of a metric that a lot of people are chasing, then naturally models would gravitate towards that.
And I just sort of hope that people would want to do this and interact with such models. But perhaps I'm a bit too optimistic here. Time will tell.